Have you ever stopped to think about why people seem increasingly incapable of thinking deeply? Why discussions turn into fights and knowledge has become superficial? The philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer, more than 150 years ago, was already warning about the dangers we see exploding around us today. We live in an era where everyone has an opinion about everything, but few really know anything, where information is infinite, but wisdom is lacking. Are we witnessing the collapse of human intelligence? The answer may lie in the revolutionary ideas of a thinker who saw beyond his time. Arthur Schopenhauer discovered something terrifying about human nature. Our reason doesn't command our lives. In fact, it's the opposite. We are driven by a blind and irrational force that he called will. This force constantly pushes us in search of desires, pleasures, and basic needs. The German philosopher realized that our intellect is merely a servant of this powerful will. When we're hungry, our rational brain finds justifications to eat. When we feel anger, our mind creates arguments to validate that emotion. When we want something, our intelligence works to get it, not to question whether we really need it. This discovery is fundamental to understanding our era. Today, more than ever, our will is being constantly stimulated. Social media, advertising, entertainment, everything was created to awaken our most primitive desires. And our poor reason, it runs behind trying to justify every impulse we feel. Schopenhauer said that only in rare moments can we free ourselves from this slavery. When we contemplate art, nature, or profound truths, our will temporarily falls silent. Only then can our intelligence truly function. But how many of these moments do we still have in our digital lives? Modern society has created the perfect environment for the will to dominate completely. Every notification is a new desire. Every scroll is a new need. Every like is a new dependency. Our intelligence no longer has time or space to emerge. This dynamic explains why intelligent people make apparently irrational choices, why debates turn into wars, why information doesn't translate into wisdom. The will has hijacked our capacity to think, and we don't even realize we've been hijacked. Schopenhauer taught us that recognizing this problem is the first step toward liberation. But do we still have the strength to take this step? The answer lies in how our reality has been completely reformulated by technology. The philosopher used the expression veil of Maya to describe how our perception of reality is always limited and illusory. Maya in Hindu philosophy is the goddess of illusion who prevents us from seeing things as they really are. For Schopenhauer, we live trapped in representations that our mind creates about the world. Today, this veil has gained an even more powerful digital version. Social media platforms are not just communication tools. They are machines for creating alternative realities. Each algorithm functions as a new veil, showing only what confirms our beliefs and desires. Imagine that you believe in a specific theory about politics or health. The algorithm quickly identifies this preference and starts showing only content that confirms your opinion. In a short time, you're convinced that all of humanity thinks like you. This is the modern version of the veil of Maya. What's most dangerous is that these digital bubbles create the illusion of knowledge. We see hundreds of posts, videos, and articles that confirm our worldview. Our mind interprets this repetition as evidence of truth. After all, if so many people are saying the same thing, it must be right. Right? Schopenhauer warned that our natural tendency is to seek confirmation, not truth. We want to be right, not to learn. Digital platforms have transformed this human tendency into an industrial system of producing false certainties. Before the internet, we were forced to live with different opinions. At school, at work, in the family, there was always someone who thought differently. This created conflict, but also intellectual growth. Today, we can live in completely separate worlds, each with its own truth. The result is a society fragmented into digital tribes, each convinced of possessing absolute truth. And the more fragmented we become, the less capable we are of thinking beyond our bubbles. The digital veil of Maya doesn't just prevent us from seeing reality. It convinces us that our illusion is more real than reality itself. This transformation in how we perceive the world leads us directly to the next aspect of the crisis: how our natural pessimism has been completely distorted by modernity. Schopenhauer was known as the pessimist philosopher, but his pessimism was in fact a form of realism. He believed that recognizing the problematic nature of existence was the first step to finding some peace. His dark view of the human condition wasn't despair, it was lucidity. The German thinker predicted that humanity would move toward a state of growing superficiality. He saw that as life became materially easier, people would lose the capacity for deep reflection. Comfort, ironically, would be the enemy of wisdom. This prophecy has been fulfilled impressively. Never in history have we had so much access to information, education, and resources. Paradoxically, we've never been so superficial in our thinking. Schopenhauer understood that adversity forces intellectual growth, while excess ease makes us mentally lazy. The philosopher also anticipated the phenomenon of democratization of knowledge. He feared a world where everyone would feel equally qualified to give opinions on any subject. For Schopenhauer, true knowledge required discipline, time, and humility, qualities that would become rare. Observe our era. Any person with a smartphone feels authorized to debate medicine with doctors, economics with economists, science with scientists. This is exactly the situation Schopenhauer feared, not because common people are incapable of learning, but because the illusion of knowledge prevents real learning. Schopenhauer's pessimism also included a healthy distrust of technological progress. He suspected that each material advance would come accompanied by a spiritual or intellectual retreat. Once again, his intuition proved accurate. Today, we see exactly this. We have more powerful computers than ever, but our capacity for concentration has diminished drastically. We have instant access to humanity's entire library, but we read fewer and fewer books. We have incredible communication tools, but we understand each other less and less. Schopenhauer's prophetic pessimism wasn't gratuitous negativity. It was a warning about the dangers we would face if we didn't develop intellectual defenses against our own impulses. Unfortunately, we didn't heed the warning, and now we face the consequences on a scale that he himself might not have imagined. The first and most obvious manifestation of this prophecy is our modern obsession with instant gratification, which is systematically destroying our capacity to think with depth. We live in the era of now. We want immediate answers, instant entertainment, results at the speed of a click. This need for immediate gratification is rewiring our brains in a concerning way. We're losing the ability to tolerate the temporary frustration that all deep thinking requires. Schopenhauer knew that true contemplation requires patience. Great ideas don't emerge in 30 seconds. Deep insights don't fit in tweets. Wisdom doesn't develop by watching 15-second videos. But our society is structured exactly to avoid any form of waiting or prolonged reflection. Think about how we consume information today. We scroll infinitely through feeds that change every second. We watch videos at accelerated speed. We read only headlines. We form opinions based on first impressions. This behavior is training our brain to automatically reject anything that requires time to be understood. What's most alarming is that this rush is invading areas where speed is the enemy of quality. We want to learn languages in 30 days, master complex skills through quick courses, solve psychological problems with instant techniques. The very idea that some things take time to develop has become unacceptable. This tyranny of speed has devastating consequences for our intellectual development. Research shows that our capacity for concentration has diminished drastically in recent decades. Many people can no longer read an entire book without checking their phone several times. Sustained attention, the foundation of all complex thinking, is becoming a rare skill. Schopenhauer observed that the will always seeks the easiest path. In our era, this path is the instant gratification offered by technology. Each notification offers us a small dose of dopamine without any effort. Why would our brain choose the hard work of thinking when it can have immediate pleasure? The result is a society addicted to superficial stimuli and increasingly incapable of dealing with the real complexity of the world. Problems that require careful reflection are abandoned in favor of simple and wrong solutions. Relationships that need time to mature are discarded for instant and empty connections. This dynamic leads us directly to the empire of superficiality, where the appearance of knowledge has completely replaced the search for truth. Our era has transformed superficiality into virtue. Being dynamic, agile, and connected has become more valued than being reflective, careful, and deep. This inversion of values is undermining the foundations of genuine thinking and creating a culture where appearance matters more than substance. Observe how we consume culture today. We prefer summaries to complete works, reviews to readings, ready-made opinions to our own analyses. We want to know about everything, but we don't want to really know anything in depth. This is the fast food mentality applied to knowledge. Quick, easy, but nutritionally empty. Social media has amplified this phenomenon to the extreme. Platforms like Instagram and TikTok are structurally incompatible with depth. Everything needs to be visual, immediate, impactful. Complex ideas are reduced to memes. Millennial philosophies become motivational posts. Scientific discoveries transform into sensationalist headlines. This superficiality isn't just an aesthetic preference. It's changing our way of thinking. When we get used to consuming only simplified versions of reality, we lose the capacity to deal with real complexity. We begin to expect everything to be simple, clear, and definitive. Schopenhauer warned that the will always prefers the easy to the true. In our era, technology has made it extremely easy to avoid any confrontation with complexity. We can live entirely in a world of simple explanations, quick answers, and comfortable certainties. The problem is that reality isn't simple. Important questions like justice, relationships, politics, economics are intrinsically complex. When we try to force them into superficial formats, we're not explaining them better, we're completely distorting them. This distortion has serious consequences. People educated on a diet of artificial simplicity become incapable of making complex decisions when they face real problems which always involve multiple variables, trade-offs, and uncertainties. They become paralyzed or make choices based on superficial criteria. The empire of superficiality also creates a false sense of understanding. After reading a post about economics, we feel we understand economics. After watching a video about relationships, we consider ourselves psychology experts. This illusion of knowledge is perhaps even more dangerous than complete ignorance because it prevents us from seeking true learning. This superficial dynamic connects directly with another alarming phenomenon, the massification of thought, where intellectual diversity is being replaced by algorithmic conformity. One of the most concerning characteristics of our era is how similar thoughts spread instantly across millions of people. We're not just talking about fads or trends, but specific ways of interpreting events, problems, and solutions. It's as if humanity is losing its intellectual diversity. Schopenhauer valued originality of thought above almost everything. For him, the capacity to think independently was the mark of true intelligence. He despised what he called herd thinking, the tendency to repeat popular ideas without critical questioning. Today, this herd thinking has been industrialized. Social media algorithms create echo chambers where the same ideas circulate indefinitely among the same people. The result is a homogenization of thought that would have been impossible before the digital era. Imagine 10 different people from completely distinct backgrounds, all sharing exactly the same opinion about a complex event, even using similar words. This phenomenon, increasingly common, reveals how our capacity to think independently is being undermined by technological forces. What's most disturbing is that this massification disguises itself as diversity. We see many different voices speaking, but all saying essentially the same thing. The internet gives us the illusion of being exposed to multiple perspectives when in reality, we're receiving superficial variations of the same basic theme. This homogenization happens through psychological mechanisms that Schopenhauer had already identified. People have a natural fear of thinking differently from the group. They want to be accepted, liked, shared. So consciously or not, they adjust their opinions to align with what they perceive as social consensus. Digital platforms have amplified this phenomenon by providing instant feedback on our ideas. How many likes, shares, positive comments an opinion receives becomes the criterion for determining its validity. Ideas that don't receive social approval are quickly abandoned, even though they might be correct. The result is a society where millions of people believe they're thinking independently, but are actually just reproducing variations of the same limited set of ideas. This false diversity is even more dangerous than open uniformity, because it prevents us from realizing that we've lost our capacity for original thought. This massification of thought leads us directly to the collapse of one of humanity's most fundamental abilities, the capacity for true contemplation. Schopenhauer considered contemplation as the highest state of human experience. For him, it was the moment when our will fell silent and our pure intelligence could emerge. In these rare moments, we became capable of perceiving reality without the filters of our desires and fears. This contemplative capacity is rapidly disappearing from modern human experience. We're losing the ability to simply observe without judging, to be present without reacting, to think without seeking immediate conclusions. Our mind has become a machine of constant production that never stops to really see. Observe your own behavior. How many times per day can you stay in total silence without external stimuli? Just observing your own thoughts. How many times can you look at something, a tree, a person, a problem, without immediately classifying, judging, or seeking utility? Contemplation requires a type of patience that our society has systematically attacked. It requires the capacity to tolerate emptiness, uncertainty, the lack of immediate stimulus. But we've been trained to fill every empty second with some form of entertainment or distraction. The smartphone has become contemplation's #1 enemy. Its mere presence, even when turned off, is sufficient to reduce our capacity for concentration. Our brain knows that at any moment it can access infinite distractions, so it never manages to surrender completely to the present moment. This loss of contemplation has devastating consequences for our intelligence. It's during contemplative moments that the deepest insights emerge, the most creative connections, the most meaningful understandings. Without these moments, our thinking becomes purely reactive and superficial. Schopenhauer believed that art, nature, and philosophy were paths to contemplation. But observe how we consume art today. We listen to music while doing other things, watch movies while checking our phones, visit museums taking selfies. We've transformed contemplative experiences into content production opportunities. The same happens with nature. A walk that should be a moment of silence and reflection becomes a photo session for social media. The sunset that should inspire contemplation becomes just a story on Instagram. We've lost the capacity to be genuinely present in experiences that should nourish our soul. This atrophy of contemplation is directly connected with another serious problem: our confusion between having an opinion and having knowledge. One of the most striking characteristics of our era is how people confuse having a strong opinion with possessing real knowledge. This confusion is generating a society where everyone feels qualified to debate any subject, regardless of their training or experience in the area. Schopenhauer made a clear distinction between knowledge and opinion. For him, true knowledge emerged from careful contemplation and disciplined study. Opinion, on the other hand, was often just a disguised expression of our desires and prejudices. Today, this distinction has completely disappeared. Social media has transformed every person into a specialist commentator on all possible subjects: medicine, economics, psychology, politics. No matter the complexity of the topic, there are always millions of people ready to offer their definitive analyses. The problem isn't that ordinary people have opinions. The problem is that these opinions are presented and accepted as if they had the same weight as specialized knowledge. A viral post from someone without medical training can influence more people than years of scientific research. This democratization of intellectual authority seems positive on the surface, but in practice is creating epistemic chaos. When all voices have the same weight, no voice has real weight. When every opinion is valid, no opinion is really valid. Schopenhauer knew that true knowledge is difficult to achieve. It requires time, discipline, humility, and willingness to be wrong. It demands that we confront our comfortable beliefs and question our basic certainties. Most people simply aren't willing to pay this price. It's much easier to form an opinion based on a few posts or videos that confirm our existing beliefs. It's more comfortable to believe that our intuition is as valid as years of specialized study. It's more satisfying to feel we know something without going through the hard work of really learning. This culture of easy opinion is undermining the foundations of real knowledge. Why would someone spend years studying a subject if they can form an informed opinion in a few hours of internet? Why develop expertise if all expertise is questioned by people who did their own research? The result is a society where trust in specialized knowledge is collapsing. But trust in amateur opinions is high. This inversion of values is making us collectively more ignorant, even having access to more information than any previous generation. This problem intensifies when we consider how our attention has been completely fragmented by modern technology. The capacity to maintain focused attention for prolonged periods has always been fundamental to intellectual development. Schopenhauer knew that deep thoughts require sustained concentration. It's not possible to understand complex ideas by constantly jumping between different stimuli. Our era has systematically attacked this capacity. Multitasking, presented as a valuable skill, is actually fragmenting our mind in a concerning way. Research demonstrates that when we try to do several things simultaneously, we don't do any of them well. Observe your own behavior during a task that requires concentration. How many times do you check your phone? How many different tabs do you have open in your browser? How many unrelated thoughts pass through your mind? Our attention has become a completely dispersed resource. This fragmentation has devastating consequences for our intellectual development. When our mind is constantly jumping between different stimuli, we lose the capacity to dive deeply into any subject. Our thinking becomes superficial by structural necessity. The problem is even more serious because our culture has begun to value this dispersion. Being multitask is seen as efficiency. Managing to process multiple information simultaneously is considered intelligence. But in reality, we're just becoming superficial data processors, losing our capacity for synthesis and deep understanding. Schopenhauer warned that the will always seeks novelty and stimulus. Our modern technology offers infinite novelty and stimulus, creating a vicious cycle where our attention becomes increasingly fragmented. Each new notification is a small reward that reinforces our dispersed behavior. This dynamic is rewiring our brains in a concerning way. Studies show that people who grew up in the digital era have greater difficulty maintaining prolonged concentration. Their minds were literally structured to process information in a fragmented and superficial way. The result is a generation that can access any information instantly, but can't concentrate enough to really understand anything. We have more powerful intellectual tools than ever existed, but we've lost the mental capacity to use them adequately. This fragmentation of attention connects directly with the decay of our educational systems, which privilege technical competencies over development of wisdom. The modern educational system is producing people who are technically competent but intellectually immature. We obsessively focus on teaching specific skills, measurable competencies, and practical knowledge. But we've completely abandoned the formation of intellectual character and wisdom. Schopenhauer believed that true education should develop the capacity to think, not just the ability to reproduce information. For him, it was more important to teach someone to question than to teach ready-made answers. More valuable to form a critical thinker than a technical specialist. Observe how our schools function today. Students memorize facts for tests, but don't learn to question the validity of these facts. They master specific techniques, but don't develop wisdom to know when to apply them. They accumulate certificates and diplomas, but leave the educational system without real capacity for independent thinking. This approach is creating a society of ignorant specialists, people who know a lot about their specific areas, but can't think critically about broader questions. Doctors who understand medicine, but can't evaluate scientific evidence. Engineers who master technology, but don't understand its social implications. The problem is that we've reduced education to professional training. We've forgotten that the original purpose of education was to form complete human beings capable of navigating existence's complexity with wisdom and discernment. Today we only form specialized workers. This change has economic roots. In a competitive world, parents and students want to guarantee employability. Schools respond by offering practical courses that promise immediate professional results. Philosophy, literature, art, everything that develops critical thinking is seen as dispensable luxury. Schopenhauer predicted exactly this situation. He knew that when education becomes purely utilitarian, we lose our humanity. When we teach only technical skills, we create sophisticated automatons, not genuine thinkers. The result is a society where people who are highly educated formally are easily manipulated by simple propaganda, where specialists in their areas make personal choices based on completely irrational criteria, where technical knowledge coexists with profound intellectual immaturity. This intellectual immaturity becomes evident when we observe how our society has become addicted to sensationalism and drama. Our era has transformed the extraordinary into ordinary through a constant escalation of sensationalism. What used to be exceptional is now expected. What used to shock is now ignored. This dynamic is desensitizing our capacity for discernment and creating an addictive need for increasingly extreme stimuli. Schopenhauer observed that human will always seeks growing intensity of experiences. When we get used to a level of stimulus, we need something stronger to feel the same satisfaction. This natural tendency has been completely exploited by modern media and technology. Observe how journalism has evolved. News that used to be reported factually is now presented as epic dramas. Every event is historic. Every problem is a crisis. Every change is a revolution. This inflated language doesn't inform better. It actually distorts our perception of reality. The same happens on social media. Common posts don't generate engagement, so people learn to dramatize their experiences. A disagreement becomes an attack. A difficulty becomes trauma. A simple success is presented as epic transformation. We're living in constant dramatic mode. This escalation of sensationalism has serious consequences for our thinking capacity. When everything is presented as extreme, we lose the ability to make subtle distinctions. When every situation is dramatized, we can no longer evaluate the relative importance of events. Schopenhauer warned that the constant search for emotional intensity atrophies our capacity to appreciate more subtle experiences. When we become addicted to drama, we lose the capacity to find meaning in simple and reflective moments. Our inner life becomes dramatically impoverished. The problem is that truly important situations lose impact when everything is treated as extraordinary. When we call everything an emergency, true emergencies go unnoticed. When everything is incredible, nothing really impresses anymore. This dynamic creates a vicious cycle where content producers need to be increasingly extreme to capture attention. YouTubers shout louder, headlines become more alarmist, debates become more aggressive. Modulation and nuance essential for intelligent communication disappear completely. The result is a society addicted to indignation, drama, and conflict. People who feel bored when there's no crisis to be indignant about, who can no longer tolerate calm and reflective conversations, who need constant emotional stimulation to feel alive. This need for constant drama connects directly with another concerning phenomenon, the general infantilization of adult thought. One of the most alarming trends of our era is how adults are adopting forms of thinking that were previously characteristic only of children. We're seeing a massive regression to magical, simplistic, and emotionally reactive mental patterns. Schopenhauer observed that children live dominated by will without sufficient intellectual development to moderate it. They want immediate gratification, simple explanations, and magical solutions. Maturity was expected to bring greater capacity to deal with complexity, ambiguity, and frustration. Today we see adults exhibiting exactly the infantile mental patterns they should have overcome. They want instant solutions to complex problems. They believe in magical explanations when reality is difficult to accept. They react emotionally when confronted with uncomfortable information. This infantilization manifests in multiple ways. In politics, we see people expecting leaders to magically solve all problems as if they were all-powerful parents. In health, they seek miraculous cures that eliminate any need for effort or personal change. Magical thinking, the belief that our desires can influence reality, is resurging with full force. Adult people believe that visualization can alter external events, that positive energy can resolve practical problems, that ignoring problems will make them disappear. This regression isn't accidental. Our technological society has created an environment that rewards infantile behavior. Social media gives us attention when we have public tantrums. Algorithms protect us from uncomfortable information. Entertainment platforms provide us with constant instant gratification. Schopenhauer knew that intellectual development requires facing unpleasant realities. It requires accepting that we don't always get what we want. It demands tolerating uncertainty and ambiguity. But our modern technology allows us to systematically avoid all these growth challenges. The result is a society of chronological adults who maintained infantile mentality, who expect the world to adapt to their desires instead of adapting their desires to reality, who interpret any frustration as personal injustice. This infantilization is creating a political and social environment where mature solutions become impossible. Complex problems that require sacrifices and compromises are rejected in favor of magical promises. Politics transforms into emotional theater where maturity is seen as weakness. This infantile dynamic connects directly with the crisis of intellectual authority that characterizes our era. Schopenhauer had a complex relationship with democracy. He valued individual freedom, but feared that unrestricted democratization could lead to mediocrity's dominion over excellence. His concerns have proven prophetic in the digital era. The German philosopher believed that not all opinions have the same value. For him, opinions based on study, reflection, and experience should have greater weight than opinions formed by impulse or prejudice. This intellectual hierarchy may sound elitist, but it reflects a basic reality. Knowledge isn't democratic. Today, we live the extreme experiment of knowledge democratization that Schopenhauer feared. Any person with internet access can publish their opinions with the same visibility as recognized specialists. This platform equality has created an illusion of authority equality. The result is what we can call tyranny of democratized ignorance. Conspiracy theories receive the same space as scientific research. Amateur opinions are presented as valid alternatives to specialized knowledge. Expertise is seen as an elite attempt to suppress popular truth. This dynamic is especially dangerous because it exploits legitimate democratic instincts. It's natural to want all voices to be heard. It's understandable to distrust authorities who may have their own interests. But when this distrust becomes total rejection of expertise, we create intellectual chaos. Schopenhauer predicted that democratization without adequate education would lead to what he called despotism of ignorance. When the majority doesn't have sufficient knowledge to evaluate complex questions, their collective decisions can be disastrous. We see this happening in public health issues, climate change, economics. Topics that require years of study to be adequately understood become matters of popular opinion. Scientific knowledge competes with research done on social media, frequently losing this competition. The problem isn't that ordinary people are incapable of learning. The problem is that our society has created the illusion that they don't need to learn. That intuition and common sense are sufficient to understand complex questions. That all specialists have hidden agendas. But ordinary people always seek truth. This systematic distrust of expertise is creating a society where important decisions are made based on proud ignorance, where competence is seen as suspicious and inexperience as virtue, where knowing less about a subject is considered qualification to give opinions about it. This dynamic connects directly with the epistemological narcissism that characterizes our era. One of the most striking characteristics of our era is how each individual considers themselves a legitimate source of universal truth. This form of intellectual narcissism is creating a fragmented society where everyone believes they possess special knowledge that others don't have. Schopenhauer had already observed that the human ego has a natural tendency to consider itself special and superior. In our era, this tendency has been amplified by technology that allows each person to have a global platform for their opinions. Epistemological narcissism manifests when someone believes their personal perspective is more valid than objective evidence. When someone thinks their research of a few hours is worth more than decades of scientific study. When someone considers their intuitions more reliable than empirical data. This mentality is extremely seductive because it offers a sensation of intellectual superiority without requiring the real work of learning. It's more gratifying to believe we've discovered hidden truths that specialists ignore than to admit we have limited knowledge about complex subjects. Social media has amplified this narcissism. by creating echo chambers where each person can find a group that validates their opinions, no matter how strange they may be. This artificial social validation reinforces the belief that their ideas are not only correct, but revolutionary. Schopenhauer knew that true knowledge requires humility. It requires recognizing the limits of our understanding. It demands willingness to be wrong and learn from others. But epistemological narcissism makes this humility impossible. The result is a society where millions of people believe they've discovered truths that the entire scientific community missed, where individuals with limited education feel qualified to refute established theories, where intellectual self-confidence is inversely proportional to real knowledge. This dynamic creates an environment where genuine learning becomes almost impossible. Why would someone seriously study a subject if they already know the truth? Why question their beliefs if they believe they're superior to all alternatives? Epistemological narcissism also explains the fierce resistance many people demonstrate when their opinions are questioned. They're not just defending ideas, they're defending their identity as truth discoverers. Questioning their opinions is questioning their intellectual superiority. This narcissistic dynamic connects directly with the extreme polarization that characterizes our public debate. The growing incapacity to maintain rational dialogues is perhaps the most visible symptom of our society's intellectual collapse. Conversations that should be joint exploration of truth have transformed into tribal wars, where the objective is to destroy the enemy, not understand their perspective. Schopenhauer observed that human will naturally sees differences of opinion as personal threats. When someone disagrees with us, our will interprets this as an attack on our identity. This primitive emotional reaction makes rational dialogue extremely difficult. Our era has intensified this problem by transforming opinions into identities. We no longer have opinions about politics. We are our political opinions. We don't have health preferences. We are our lifestyles. This fusion between personal identity and intellectual positions makes any disagreement an existential threat. The result is that debates have transformed into tribal validation rituals. People don't participate in discussions to learn or question their beliefs. They participate to demonstrate loyalty to their group and attack opposing groups. The objective isn't to discover truth, but to win the battle. This polarization is amplified by algorithms that discovered that conflict generates more engagement than cooperation. Digital platforms profit from our indignation, so they constantly feed us content designed to irritate us. We're trained to see other human groups as existential enemies. Schopenhauer knew that true dialogue requires a special form of intellectual humility. It requires willingness to consider that we might be wrong. It demands the capacity to separate ideas from personal identity. It requires the ability to see value in different perspectives. All these capacities are atrophying in our society. We've developed a war mentality where admitting error is seen as weakness, where considering opposing perspectives is treason, where changing opinion is shameful inconsistency. The result is a society divided into hostile tribes that can no longer communicate effectively. Each group lives in its own alternative reality, seeing others as fundamentally dishonest or ill-intentioned. This fragmentation makes collective solutions to complex problems practically impossible. Polarization also creates an environment where extreme positions are socially rewarded. Moderation is seen as lack of conviction. Nuance is interpreted as cowardice. The capacity to see multiple sides of complex questions, a mark of intellectual maturity, becomes socially undesirable. This polarized dynamic leads us to the question, do spaces still exist where genuine intelligence can prosper? Despite the somber panorama, spaces still exist where more elevated forms of intelligence manage to survive and even prosper. These refugees offer hope and models for how we can resist the general intellectual collapse. Schopenhauer believed that true intelligence always finds ways to preserve itself, even in hostile eras. He himself lived in an era that didn't value his type of philosophy, but managed to develop his ideas by creating his own intellectual space. Today, we can identify some of these refugees. Certain universities still maintain commitment to rigorous investigation and genuine debate. Some scientific communities preserve elevated standards of evidence and reasoning. Determined groups of artists continue creating works that demand deep contemplation. These spaces have common characteristics that protect them from general degradation. First, they maintain elevated standards for participation. They don't allow amateur opinions to have the same weight as developed expertise. Second, they value process over result. The method of reaching conclusions matters more than the conclusions themselves. Third, these refugees cultivate intellectual patience. They recognize that important questions don't have simple answers. They're willing to live with uncertainty and ambiguity. They value deep questions more than convenient answers. Fourth, they maintain genuine intellectual diversity. Not the false diversity of our culture where all positions are variations of the same basic theme, but true diversity of methods, perspectives, and fundamental assumptions. These refugees also share a less obvious characteristic. They actively resist pressures of popularization. They don't try to make their ideas accessible at any cost. They recognize that some truths require intellectual preparation to be understood. This resistance to popularization is crucial. Schopenhauer knew that when we try to oversimplify complex ideas, we frequently destroy them in the process. Some insights can only be preserved in their original form, requiring that people rise to the level of the idea instead of lowering the idea to the popular level. These refugees aren't perfect, nor completely isolated from external pressures, but they offer examples of how communities committed to intellectual excellence can maintain elevated standards even in a hostile environment. Their existence proves that intellectual collapse isn't inevitable nor irreversible. With conscious effort and deliberate protection, it's possible to create and maintain spaces where genuine intelligence can flourish. This leads us to the question of how aesthetic experience can serve as an antidote to intellectual collapse. For Schopenhauer, art represented the most powerful form of human experience. It was through encounters with genuine works of art that our will could temporarily fall silent, allowing our pure intelligence to emerge. This aesthetic experience offered a refuge from the tyranny of desires and a window to superior forms of consciousness. In our era of intellectual collapse, authentic art becomes even more crucial as a means of preserving and developing intelligence. But we're facing a simultaneous crisis in the production and consumption of genuine art. Most of what our society calls art is actually entertainment products designed for easy consumption and immediate gratification. Music that doesn't require attention, films that don't provoke reflection, literature that doesn't challenge assumptions. This pseudo-art reinforces our intellectual laziness instead of combating it. True art, in the Schopenhauerian sense, requires something different from both creator and observer. It requires that the artist transcend their personal impulses and capture something universal. It requires that the observer open themselves to experiences that may be initially uncomfortable or confusing. This form of art still exists, but is being marginalized by market forces that favor instant entertainment. Composers who create contemplative music, writers who explore deep philosophical questions, visual artists who demand careful reflection, all face growing difficulties finding audiences. The problem isn't just that genuine art is being less produced, but that we've lost the capacity to consume it adequately. When our attention was fragmented by technology, we lost the ability to surrender ourselves completely to an aesthetic experience. Schopenhauer knew that true aesthetic experience requires a special form of receptivity. We need to be able to silence our habitual thoughts, suspend our immediate judgments, and allow the work to transform us. This capacity for contemplative receptivity is becoming rare. But when we manage to have authentic aesthetic experiences, they function as a form of intellectual therapy. They remind us of superior forms of consciousness. They exercise our capacity for deep concentration. They reconnect us with more elevated aspects of human experience. Therefore, seeking and cultivating genuine aesthetic experiences becomes a form of resistance to intellectual collapse, not just as escape, but as exercise of mental capacities that our society is systematically attacking. This salvific function of art leads us to the final point: how we can apply Schopenhauer's insights to reconquer our capacity for wisdom. From all this analysis of contemporary intellectual collapse through the Schopenhauerian lens, the crucial question arises: what can we do as individuals and as a society? Is there any way to reverse this deterioration and reconquer our capacity for genuine thinking? Schopenhauer offers us a path, but it requires courage, discipline, and willingness to swim against the cultural current. First, we must recognize that the reconquest of wisdom is fundamentally a personal project. We can't wait for institutions or technologies to solve the problem for us. The first step is developing what Schopenhauer called denial of the will. The capacity to resist the immediate impulses that our society constantly stimulates. This means deliberately creating moments of silence, boredom, and reflection in our lives. It means resisting the temptation of constant time filling with stimuli. Second, we must cultivate intellectual patience. In a world that promises instant answers, we need to relearn to live with questions, develop tolerance for ambiguity, uncertainty, and complexity. Accept that important questions don't have simple solutions. Third, we need to recover intellectual humility. This means recognizing the limits of our knowledge, questioning our certainties, and being willing to change our minds when presented with better evidence. It means valuing the learning process more than possessing opinions. Fourth, we should actively seek experiences that challenge our habitual thinking, read difficult books, expose ourselves to different perspectives, study subjects that require sustained mental effort, treat intellectual development as a long-term project that deserves serious investment. Fifth, we need to create and protect spaces for genuine contemplation. This may mean regular periods without electronic devices, meditation or reflection practices, time dedicated to careful observation of nature or art. Finally, we must develop intellectual discrimination, the capacity to distinguish between genuine knowledge and pseudo-knowledge, between authentic art and entertainment, between wisdom and opinion. This discrimination only develops through constant exposure to examples of excellence. Schopenhauer reminds us that true intellectual transformation is always minoritarian. Most people in any era choose the easiest path, but each individual who chooses the more difficult path of genuine development contributes to preserving the possibility of human wisdom. The reconquest of wisdom isn't a utopian project of total social transformation. It's individual work of resistance and cultivation that, when multiplied by sufficient people, can keep alive the flame of genuine intelligence even in dark times. Schopenhauer's ideas offer us a precise diagnosis of our time. We live the collapse of intelligence because we allowed our will, stimulated by technology, to completely dominate our capacity for reflection. But this same diagnosis shows us the way back. Wisdom hasn't died. It has just taken refuge, waiting for those brave enough to seek it. In every moment, we choose contemplation over reactivity, depth over superficiality. We're contributing to the intellectual resistance that our era desperately needs. If this content made you reflect on the state of intelligence in today's world, leave your like and subscribe to the channel. We need to create a community of people committed to genuine thinking. Together, we can keep alive the tradition of human wisdom.